Hey everyone, Cole Caparoon here. Thank you so much for joining me on what I think is going to be one of the best videos of the entire year. Today we're going to be going over every facet of vocal compression. We're going to talk about how a compressor works and what each individual control and setting does. We're going to talk about choosing the right compressor for your particular song. We're going to go over my favorite compressors, the compressors that I use religiously. We're going to go over tips and tricks and things to watch out for to let you know that you're compressing something too hard. And we're going to jump into Pro Tools and you guys are going to watch me dial in a compressor on a vocal and then go over settings and how it affects the vocal itself so you can hear as I change settings what it's actually doing. We're going to explain all this. When this video is over, you are going to have a much better grasp on how to dial in your compressor for your vocals in your mixes. Let's get into it. So how does a compressor actually work and what does it do? A compressor is a plug-in or a piece of hardware that squashes the dynamic range. It brings the loudest parts of a signal and the quietest parts of the signal and it makes them closer together. Now another way to look at this is it's bringing the quietest elements up in the mix while taming the hottest elements. Vocal compression in particular is in my opinion, one of the single most important things to making a vocal sit properly in a mix. So the different controls on our compressor are an input, which just controls as you turn it up. It controls how much signal is being put into that compressor, whether it's hardware or software. Now, threshold on a compressor is the level at which compression starts when signal crosses over that threshold. So if you turn your threshold up, that means the signal has to be much louder in order to start compression. And if you turn the threshold way down, that means compression starts when the volume is much lower. We're gonna get way deeper into that in a bit. The attack on a compressor controls how fast gain reduction starts after that signal crosses the threshold. The release on a compressor controls how quickly the gain reduction goes away after that signal drops back below the threshold. The ratio on a compressor controls how many dB of gain reduction happens when that threshold is crossed, how aggressive and how hard does a compressor clamp down once that signal crosses the threshold level. Now, when you hear someone say gain reduction, what they're talking about is once that signal crosses over the threshold, how many dB of gain reduction there is on the compressors. The compressor turning those peaks down by 2 dB, by 5 dB, by 20 dB. How many dB is that compressor hitting? So that's gain reduction. If you're brand new to this, that's okay. Watch that last section a handful of times until that really burns in your mind before moving on. Now, a lot of compressors have an adjustable threshold. Most plugins that you use that aren't modeled after a piece of hardware, they have an adjustable threshold. However, a lot of hardware units, for instance, this 1176, many hardware compressors have what they call a fixed threshold. Now, what this means is you would use the input control to turn up the volume going into that threshold. So instead of, here's the level of your signal, instead of bringing the threshold down so that way it starts compressing, you would turn the input of the compressor up so that way it rams that signal louder into the threshold, and that's how you control how much gain reduction you're getting or how hard the compressor's hitting. So like on an 1176, if you want more compression, you turn the input up. If you want less compression, you turn the input down. And then with all compressors, you would balance that level on the output of the compressor to make up for how much gain reduction there is. Now, on a lot of compressors, they'll actually call this makeup gain, and in some compressors, they just call this the output. Before we move on, I would like to give a huge shout out to the sponsors of this video, Sweetwater and Universal Audio. I've been using Universal Audio stuff for a very long time. I run an Apollo here. I use all the Universal Audio plugins, have for many years, and obviously been massive fans of the Icons, 1176 LA2A, for a very long time. Huge fans of them, and I really appreciate them coming on board to sponsor this video. Also, huge shout out to Sweetwater. I buy all my gear from Sweetwater. There's links down in the description going over all the gear that I use and all the gear that you see in this video. And if you use those links to purchase, I get just a tiny commission, and it really helps the channel out, really helps me be able to put more time and effort into these videos. And Sweetwater has been a massive help in growing this channel. So you get down there, use those links, and I really appreciate it, and they really appreciate it. Since we're going over tracking vocals and vocal compression and that sort of stuff, Sweetwater was kind enough to shoot me over a refresher pair of my Audio-Technica ATH M50Xs. I've been using these headphones for literally years to track with. Any sort of tracking, acoustic guitar, drums, vocals, if I'm tracking, I'm using a pair of M50s, Audio-Technica M50s, and I've been doing this for the better part of my 19-year career. As a matter of fact, here's my old ones, my last pair. Now, not only do these sound great, one of my favorite things about these headphones is the fact that every single major studio has a pair, and so you get a lot of consistency from one room to the next. If I go to another studio and I'm tracking vocals at that studio, they're gonna have a pair of these, and it helps me know exactly what I'm listening to when I'm in different rooms that I'm unfamiliar with. Big fan of these headphones. Thank you guys so much for refreshing my pair of Audio-Technica headphones. Check these out if you've not used a pair before. Okay, back to compression. So the song that we're using as an example today is a song called Be My Crazy by Ross Copley. This song is obviously not out yet because it's still in here. It's also not mixed yet. It's not even really done yet, but this is the finished vocal track, and he was kind enough to let me use it in this video, so I'll put a link to his socials in the description below. If you guys dig the song or the sound at all, go give him a follow as thanks and appreciation for letting me use a song like this in these videos. As you guys know, it's incredibly hard to get music of this caliber to use in these videos, so thank you so much, Ross, for letting me use your song. Okay, let's jump into Pro Tools and start looking at some stuff. So my starting place for nearly every song is like a medium attack and like pretty fast or fastest release. Depends on the compressor for sure. For the Fab filter, I'm usually starting out about 25 milliseconds attack and about 100 milliseconds of release. But plugins seem to react faster and with more aggression than hardware, so I tend to use a slower release on plugins than I do on hardware. But we're gonna go through this 1176. This is my dedicated vocal compressor. Everything that I do goes through this, pretty much everything that I do. And so the first thing that I wanna do is just dial in this compressor and let you guys watch me dial it in and just listen to the differences as I dial it in. And then we're gonna stop and talk about it and explain a whole bunch of things. Here we go. So here's the song.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling, girl, every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy blue-eyed blue jean baby. Yeah, be my for you to be my crazy Friday night feeling, girl, every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy blue-eyed blue jean baby. Yeah, be my for you to be my crazy Friday night feeling, girl, every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy blue-eyed blue jean baby. Yeah, be my for you to be my crazy Friday night feeling, girl, every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy blue-eyed blue jean baby.
Okay, so that feels really good to me. That is about where I would let it sit. As you can see, we're over 10 dB of compression, of gain reduction nearly the entire time. And where it felt best to me is just below a medium, just slower than a medium attack, and fastest release. Now, the first thing that I want to point out, and in my opinion, one of the most important things of dialing in a compressor is how the release time actually positions the vocal like closer and further from you. So the faster the release, the closer the vocal is, and the slower the release, the further away a vocal is. And so basically what I'm going to do is, we're on the fastest release. I'm just going to turn this slower, and I want you to listen to how the vocal feels like it's getting further away as I rotate. Oh, I should mention before we do that on an 1176 anyway, the attack and release controls, think of it like a gas pedal in a car. The more gas you give it, the faster it goes. So 1 is the slowest attack and 7 is the fastest attack. And the release, 1 is the slowest release and 7 is the fastest release. So the higher the number, the faster it goes. So I'm just gonna rotate this release backwards and make it slower, and listen to how the vocal falls away from you in the mix. Here we go.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling, girl, every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy blue-eyed blue jean baby. Yeah, be my crazy.
Now, this happens for a couple reasons. One, it's because it's holding the compression longer, so it's actually turning more of the vocal down the slower the release is. But it's also because that low-level information is not being let back up. So when you're on the fastest release, the beginnings and ends and the quietest parts of a vocal are often brought up to be more in line with the same volume as the loudest parts, and this gives the impression that the vocal is much closer to you coming out the speakers. This is one of my tricks when people ask me how I get my vocals like so close and so in your face while still having plenty of reverb and plenty of delay. This is one of the reasons, and a really fast release on a compressor brings that vocal closer to you. Okay, so let's go over to the verse here. The verse in this song is much, much quieter. So here's the verse with the chorus compression settings.
You could be my neon that keeps me up until the break of dawn, 'cause you keep it turned on. You could be my wrong and right, little bit of heaven with a wild side on. But what I really want is to see, girl, for you to...
Actually, this is set pretty good. So one of the tricks that I do in making sure that I'm not compressing too much is I pick the very quietest part of the vocal, and then we make sure no compression is happening. Whatever settings we like, there can be no compression happening on the very quietest part of the vocal. So here's how I would dial this in.
Girl, for you to be, for you to be my crazy. Girl, for you to be, for you.
So you can see how the needle doesn't move at all on that last B.
Girl, for you to be, for you.
And so what we're doing here is we're setting this up so that way we're using the maximum amount of compression possible without affecting things that don't need affected. There's probably other parts in this vocal that are also not getting affected. Let's listen to this line.
Be my wrong and right, little bit of heaven with a wild side on. But what I really want is to see.
Yeah, you can see some of those quietest words are getting almost no compression.
But what I really want is to see, girl.
And this feels really nice to me. It's bringing up in volume those quietest parts of the vocal, so that way they're nice and present, they're still in your face, but we're not really compressing them, and we're not slamming them too hard. Okay, so this is about where I would like it dialed in for the verse. Now let's take a look at the chorus.
But what I really want is to see, girl, for you to be, for you to be my crazy Friday night feeling, girl, every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high.
Yeah, that's really good, actually. So this is a pretty good setting, pretty good compromise between chorus and vocal, and obviously the chorus vocal is much, much louder than the verse vocal. If I could have my cake and eat it too, I'd probably hit this chorus just a little bit harder with compression, but we're gonna talk more about that in a second. First, I wanna go over the different ratios and what they sound like. And so we're on a 4-to-1 ratio right now. If we go up to an 8-to-1, go up to a 12-to-1, go up to a 20-to-1, what is going to happen is the compression is going to get much more drastic on the upper parts of that vocal, the loudest parts of the vocal. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this compressor and about most compressors is they actually have kind of a different character for each ratio. And so you do have to redial in your settings in order to get an equal amount of compression. So here's that chorus, and then we're just gonna go all the way to 20-to-1 so that way you can hear the maximum difference, and I'll dial it in. Here is that vocal with 4-to-1.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day.
Okay, now I'm gonna change it in the middle and redial it in while you're listening.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy.
Okay, now that what you can hear there, if you can hear it, hopefully YouTube compression isn't absolutely ruining this. What you hear there is the compressor gets a lot more grabby and a lot more aggressive. It's getting so much more aggressive and grabby and sounds a lot less natural. Now 20-to-1 is useful on some things, higher ratios are useful on some things, but it's a good example of the higher the ratio, the more grabby and the more aggressive something is gonna get. So a 20-to-1 on a drum room microphone is awesome. 2-to-1, 4-to-1 is awesome on vocals, and I find that anything over 4-to-1 starts to get too grabby and too aggressive on a vocal. So let's dial this back into 4-to-1.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy.
Cool, that sounds really good. Now, if you were using just a regular compressor, a regular plug-in compressor, something that's not modeled after a piece of hardware, most plugins have an input, a threshold, and an output. And so what you would do is you would set your input so that way it's hitting the front end of the compressor at the appropriate amount. And instead of turning the input up and down to get the amount of compression, you would drag your threshold up and down to get the amount of compression you wanted. And then you would use your output to balance that. And so this particular compressor, 1176, doesn't have a threshold, but you use your input as many hardware units do. These vocals were recorded with the Manley reference cardioid. This microphone is crazy good, crazy good. It's like a 47. It's got all the bottom end and mid-range push of a 47 with the top end air or top end sizzle of kind of like a C12, kind of like a more airy 251. Anyway, one of my favorite vocal microphones. That was the microphone that I used to track these vocals. I think it's absolutely incredible, and I'm blown away by how this microphone sounds. Now, the song largely dictates what type of compression, what compressor we're gonna use, and how much compression we're gonna use. Example, a really soft acoustic vocal or a soft piano vocal sort of thing is gonna get much less vocal compression than a really dense, hard-hitting rock song or a rock country tune or like a really modern, dense pop mix. Those songs, that dense, aggressive, hard-hitting, close-in-your-face kind of songs, they're gonna get much more compression and more aggressive compression than the softer, more ballady, more natural, organic sort of music. Now, in addition to the actual settings and how hard we're hitting the compressor, every type of compressor has a different sort of sound. So all the famous models of compressors you've seen throughout history, they have a character to them. And a lot of the plugins, even the transparent plugins, there's a particular character to them, even if that character is that it's transparent. And so I think it's important to try out different compressors on every song if you want, or find out the compressors, like experiment, try a whole bunch of compressors out and figure out what one you think you like best. And if you're not sure, just continue that experimentation song after song after song after song, and you will eventually find ones that you end up leaning into more than others, and that's awesome. That's a good thing. Now, for me personally, the vocal compressor is an 1176. And I promise you it's not because Universal Audio is sponsoring this video. It's actually because that's what it is, and I'm pumped to have them sponsor this video because it's my favorite vocal compressor. A huge percentage of my favorite mixes coming up were done by Chris Lord Alge, and he famously uses a vintage Blue Stripe 1176 on his vocals. He also famously has like 20 1176s, and instead of turning the knobs on them, he patches a different one in, but that's a whole nother conversation. So some version of an 1176, plug-in or hardware, has been on my vocal in every single mix, nearly every single mix for the better part of my entire career. So we're talking thousands of songs here. The LA2A is a fantastic choice for more chill ballad style stuff, softer stuff. It's a much softer, more round, pillowier compressor. LA2A is great for that stuff. And another one that I really like is the FabFilter compressor for a plug-in transparent, ultra transparent compressor. Really like that compressor. And I also use the FabFilter Multiband compressor on pretty much every single vocal chain in addition to the 1176. And when we get into Pro Tools in a minute, I'm gonna go over all of these details and show you guys how I set it up and let you hear it all. So one of the techniques that I use all the time, I briefly mentioned it earlier, is stacking compressors, using more than one compressor on a vocal. Now I do this in every single mix with this 1176 and the Multiband compressor, the FabFilter Multiband, which we're gonna go over in 1 second. But also, every compressor has like a limit of how hard you can push it before it starts falling apart. Every compressor is different. Some of them you can push very little, some you can really slam before it starts falling apart, but there is a sweet spot for every compressor. So as you become more refined, your ear becomes more experienced and more tasteful, you'll start to notice this. When you push a compressor a little bit too far, it starts to fall apart. And sometimes I still don't have enough compression on a vocal. So what I do in these instances is I will put another compressor immediately after it. Now this does a couple things. This lets me kind of share the load between the two compressors so I can get the overall gain reduction to what I want for the vibe of the song and what's necessary for the vocal. So this lets me get there without hitting either compressor nearly as hard. Also lets me choose two compressors that might have slightly different character. If I want to build up one overall compression character, that's not possible from a single compressor. Now, like I said, I do this almost every mix with the multiband compressor after the 1176, but if that's not enough, I'll usually use the Universal Audio 176 plugin. That's been one of my go-to vocal compressor plugins since they released it like 2 years ago, however long it's been. Absolutely phenomenal plug-in compressor, but I will often put that after the 1176 and just start touching it a little bit more. 2 dB, 3 dB, 4 dB of gain reduction, just to nudge that vocal a little bit flatter so that way I can get to the result that I'm after. But stacking compressors is something you should be conscious of. If you can't get there with one compressor, use more than one compressor rather than just slamming a compressor to 30 dB of gain reduction. If you need that much compression, you're usually better off using more than one compressor. Okay, so now let's jump back into Pro Tools and let's take a look at the two ways that I stack compressors, one of which being what I do all the time on every single song no matter what, and the other way being what I do some of the time. So the one thing that I do all the time on every single song is I put a multiband, the FabFilter multiband, after the hardware chain of EQ and compressor, whichever way you're doing it. After your main vocal compressor, I will put this multiband, this FabFilter multiband. And what I want is I want to dial it in where every single band, I've specifically selected these bands to handle different frequency ranges, but I want it to be dialed in so that way every single frequency only compresses at the loudest parts. We don't want this running like the whole time. We want it taming the peaks of the different frequency ranges. So this is my default setting. Let's see what it looks like on this vocal. This is my own custom preset that I start with because I like these frequency points here. So let's take a look.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling, girl, every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kinda save me. Yeah,
so we're already in a pretty good spot. I know I said not to use presets, But this preset is my starting point, and I will tweak all of the settings from here, including the frequency points on some singers. So,
for you to be my crazy.
But this is set up perfectly for him. So I will often identify like where the sibilance of a vocal lies, and I'll adjust this band right here down or up to cover all of the sibilance. And you can see this highest band is only hitting when his sibilance hits.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl.
That's exactly what I want. I want it only turning the high end down when his sibilance hits. Same thing with this low band here. You can see that it's only compressing when he hits his lowest notes.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day.
And so what this does is this helps maintain a really consistent bottom end in the vocal. And the same thing with the two mid bands.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kind of say.
And then I will often tweak these to taste by pushing them up a little bit.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kind of save me.
Something like that, but you get the point. And so my settings on this, what I like, so the threshold, the frequency, the crossover points for each band gets adjusted per song. The threshold for each band gets adjusted individually per song. I have the fastest attack and the fastest release possible. And this is mainly because I want this compressor to not lend any character whatsoever. I don't want any attack or release characteristics. I want it to just turn down frequencies as they're popping through. And then my ratio I leave set to 4:1. I've got the knee set to hardest, so it grabs it the most aggressively, especially because we're only turning down a couple dB in most of these situations. And I've got the look ahead turned up a little bit, and I've got 4 times oversampling turned on here. Oversampling is really great, and it's one of my favorite things about the FabFilter stuff. So I do this on every single vocal. Now, like I talked about earlier, if you still don't have enough compression, you're hitting your 1176 or whatever compressor as hard as you can, you're hitting your FabFilter in an appropriate level to balance these frequencies out. If you still don't have enough compression, then what I will commonly do is I will add this UA 176. Absolutely love this compressor. This is so good. And let me just dial this into like the maximum amount of compression that I could stomach for this song so you can kind of get a vibe for it. I'm going to leave it on 2:1 as I usually do because it's more subtle, less grabby. So let's see what we got here.
For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day. Hallelujah, Sunday kind of save me. Yeah, my tipsy whiskey high. Come on and be mine. Be my crazy. For you to be my crazy.
Okay, now I don't even think this is necessary on this song. This is not something that I would do on this song. I'm just trying to show you the next option for getting more compression out of a vocal if you think it's necessary. If you have an incredibly dynamic singer, singer whose softest parts and loudest parts are wildly apart from each other, I will commonly do this. And same thing when I was dialing in my hardware compressor. I do the same thing with the plugins where on the quietest part of this vocal. So you can see, what are we hitting, 3 or 4 dB. Let's take a listen here.
For you to be my crazy.
Yeah, so we're hitting 3 or 4 dB of gain reduction on this chorus vocal. Now let's go back to that part in the verse that we were setting the compressor on and see if there's any compression.
Girl, for you to be.
Yeah, so there's a half dB of compression still on that quietest B. So, I mean, you can live with that. I would probably tend to pull this down so that quietest B is still getting no compression.
Girl, for you to be. For you.
Barely touching it. So that's a little bit better. Let's listen from there into the chorus and see how hard this hits when the chorus hits.
Girl, for you to be. For you to be my crazy Friday night feeling girl every day. Hallelujah.
That feels pretty good to me. Now, I may work in some automation. I will probably draw in automation to make this chorus louder. Volume automation in Pro Tools when I'm mixing, so that way there's a bump in volume. But that feels overall pretty good. I don't find it necessary to add this compressor in this particular instance, but I wanted to show it for the sake of this video. Now, I know the sponsor list on this video is a little bit longer than normal, so thank you guys for dealing with this and sticking around with me. I very much appreciate it. If you like this sort of content, this is the last sponsor, by the way, and it's me. I'm also a sponsor of this video. If you guys are a fan of this sort of content, this tutorial style content, educational style content, I have a Patreon page. Also, there'll be a link in the description for the Patreon, where we go in extreme in-depth tutorials. We go into like mix breakdowns where you guys get to see every facet of a mix, popular song that I've mixed. We do like live Q&As, there's awesome merch, all kinds of stuff. Get down there and go hit up the Patreon if you're interested in much more in-depth personalized content. That's it for the sponsor reads. Thank you guys for sticking around through that. All right, so now I want to go over some things to look out for when you're compressing. These are kind of warning signs that you've taken it too far, and these are really important things, I think, to pay attention to. So one of the things that happens when you compress a vocal too hard is the sibilants and the breaths start coming out way too much. So you never want to compress something so hard that the breaths pop out as loud as the vocal itself. That's a pretty good sign that you've went too far. Sibilance gets a little bit more tricky. It's a good thing to watch for because sibilance won't trigger a compressor as hard as the voice actually will. And so you can get to a spot pretty easily where the sibilants, the S's and the T's and the K's start hitting as hard, start being as loud as the vocal itself. This is something that you want to pay attention to. If you can get by with less compression, so that way that doesn't happen, awesome. If you're still not where you think you need to be with the compression of the vocal, then unfortunately the move is you have to go in and you have to cut every piece of sibilance and turn it down and crossfade it. Melodyne does a pretty good job of this too. You can turn sibilance down in Melodyne, but that's something you really want to pay attention to, is how loud the breaths and the sibilants are in relationship to the vocal itself. Okay, the next thing that you want to pay attention to is if you compress a vocal too hard, you start taking impact and energy actually out of the vocal. For all the energy that you gain for the fact that the vocal is just real in your face and starts to get a little crunchy and sounds awesome, there is a point when you can take it too far, when a big powerful note is no longer bigger and more powerful than the rest of the vocal. You've compressed too hard. If the difference between a quiet part and a loud part, and if there isn't any difference at all there, you've compressed too hard. It's one of the reasons why in this song, I don't want to raise the volume of the verses with clip gain to be the same as the chorus, because for all the compression that's going on here, for as hard as I'm compressing this vocal, I still need there to be a difference. There has to be an impact when that chorus vocal hits, and if you compress it too hard, you take that impact away, and no amount of volume automation drawn back in can fix that. The next thing I want to make sure that I point out is that every singer and every song and every compressor has a different optimum amount of compression. Now, and this is aside from the fact that this is a creative effort and it's all subjective. What you think is too much compression, I might really like, and vice versa. But even outside of that creative, subjective context, there is still an appropriate amount for each song. So don't get settled into using the exact same settings, mostly settings. I use the same couple compressors on everything, almost always the 1176, but I am always playing with settings because no two songs need the exact same settings, specifically amount of gain reduction and release time. Those are the two things that I pay attention to for every song, and they are different or slightly different for every single song. So don't just set your compressor and forget it. Don't just use presets if you're on plugins. Make sure that you give each song and each singer inside of each song its own individual treatment and make it personalized. Dial it in to be optimum for your situation at that moment. Don't forget to check the links in the description for all of the stuff that we talked about in this video. Thanks again to Sweetwater and to Universal Audio for sponsoring this video. Super pumped on my my new Audio-Technica headphones. Thank you for sending a replacement for me, very much appreciated. And if you guys want more content like this, more in-depth tutorial type, educational type of content, check out the Patreon, link in the description, and become a member, and I hope to see you over there, and I hope all this stuff helped you. Thank you guys for sticking around with me all the way to the end. If you made it this far, if you made it all the way to the end, drop a comment and let me know. Let me know that you made it to the end of this extremely long, in-depth technical video. I really appreciate you guys. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.